turn to Pietro Ameglio, who again is a Gandhian civil rights and peace activist, a leading theorist and practitioner of nonviolent social movements in Mexico, and a professor at La Salle University. Pietro.
And National University also. I'm very happy to share here. We call it Think Out Loud. It's the style we use for nonviolent and peace action, an epistemic style. The question, the problem that made me cross the ocean for speaking few minutes, but for learning a lot from my friends, is what to do as a Catholic Church and nonviolent activism for help in some way stopping a genocide in Holy Land. That's the reflection I will share. I won't share ideas. I never work with ideas alone. I like to share a reflection, a continued reflection with some theoric principles and some very practical action I will finish in the last part. I say this because I don't want to speak about only books, but of real experience we have in Mexico. All what I say is humble, is little, but it's real. And it's collective. It's not something only of myself. It's things we've been learning in a collective way. Faith, action. So in that sense, October is a very important month for us in nonviolence. Is the anniversary of Gandhi's birth, World Day of Nonviolence, is the anniversary of Francis. For us, the same 2 October of Gandhi's anniversary is the day that died in 97, Father Donald Hessler, the Maryknoll priest that brought nonviolence in Mexico in the 60s, a very big example and teacher of nonviolence for all of us. And he used to say that God has a lot of sense of humor. And that's an idea I will have till the day I die. Well, I'll pass to another life, in the sense that I see every day that, and now I see myself here in the Vatican and only can be a joke of God because nobody that knows me can imagine me here, but I am very grateful and happy to be. And also, so I entrust them, Gandhi, Donald, Francis, and also the Holy Spirit, of whom I'm very devoted. I've seen his action many times in my life, and I've seen how, as a wind, he does things that we don't know how happen. I've seen that many times. So, in that sense, I will try to build this reflection and action. For us, the reflection is an action. This that we are doing for me is a nonviolent direct action. It's not a metaphysical, theoretical moment. Because reflection and the bodies are the first weapons we have for struggling and changing reality. And we must learn how to use them well. And when I say reflection, I don't say information. I say knowledge, that it's another thing, and it needs concepts. So in that sense, one of the concepts I have is that our Pope is still alive. He's, for me, a little miracle in the Church for many advanced actions and reflections in many fields, and we must try to do as more as we can with him, learning with him and sharing our learnings with him. So for me, it's important always to see, for example, when this Catholic Institute started 3 weeks ago, his message was very clear in the sense that nonviolence is a style of peace politics, should be the guide in the world in how we treat each other. That's very important for me. And the Catholic Church will accompany every attempt to build peace, also with active and creative nonviolence. He said that in 2017 in the World Day of Peace. So I think the Pope, that it's a person that is here present, even if he's not physically, but I'm sure his spirit and his mind, and all of you is here, is an open key for nonviolence in the world, and he can use that power, and we can use it with him, and not only the Catholic community. That, for me, is very important. Not only him, because here, as Leo said first, who taught us, teached us about nonviolence are street boys and girls, Indians, indigenous and peasants communities of autonomy in Mexico. We learned too much about them. Now, particularly families of disappeared people with whom we work the last 15 years, that are the most peace builders of the country, 90% women, very important actions and moral they have, and they have something important when we speak of nonviolence, that they started searching their treasures, as they call the beloved people that have been disappeared, without asking permission to the government, because the government doesn't want to do that. Not the last, but the before governments. So they started searching in clandestine graves and finding lots of cadavers.
Corpses.
Eh?
Corpses or cadavers.
Corpse, bones, with this action. But the concept important that I will use afterward is without asking permission. That for me is a very important value of nonviolence. If you want really to go further to the root of the problems. Because many times the power is involved in violence. So if you ask permission, he will tell you not to do anything. Okay. So I think church must recuperate its prophetic role in history. Prophetic means many things, but means also to do things in a deep way, in a real way. Now I will advance in that. And we have a situation very hard for our church, for all of us, that is that in Holy Land, 24 hours in the day, by the TV, the radio, the medias, we are seeing a genocide, not a massacre, a genocide. I will go deep in that. For 1 year, I can't believe that. 1 year, every day worse than the day before, looking at the television and no power, no forces of legal, institutional, multilateral of the world stop, and most of them in complete silence and complicity. That's for me a measure of the level of dishumanity we are, and the level of what I'll call a border of our humanity, how is very, very soft. Jesus walked in Gaza. Jesus ate in Gaza. Jesus prayed in Gaza. He meditated there. He confronted authorities there. And of course in West Bank, in Jerusalem. So as Martin Luther said, the problem is that we are in front non-violence or non-existence, because Pope, we have just listened, spoke about Third World War. Everybody speaks about the risk of a nuclear war. But it's not a way of feeding terror between us. It's a very real situation, many people say. So how Catholic Church and the head has nothing to say clearly in a non-violent style, not in words. Now I'll go deep to the problem, and I will share some concepts. I'm not here for being friend with you. I'm here for challenging you and me, because I have in my heart been here for many months, and not only here, and really I would like, in a very humble way, to not share what to do, not tell anybody what to do, or not share anything about being guilty, but sharing real problems we must confront if we really use well the word nonviolence and faith. One thing important is that peace, nonviolence need a surname always. We can't speak about peace, war, violence in general. We must put a space and a time. For that, I say, and I use the word of women from Israel and Palestine of last week, Palestine is the key to peace throughout the world. Palestine is the key to peace now. So that's a first important reality principle. We can speak in general about thousands of nonviolence and peace ideas, but we must concrete something. And there is a little detail that is a genocide and in Holy Land. It's not a little detail for Christians. Second thing, very important of nonviolence, we've been learning, and Donald Hessler insisted. Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico is the main virgin, no? The country is the symbol. And she teaches, orders an indigenous John Diego to do something, and she asks him two great virtues of nonviolence that we've seen all our lives. Be humble and be audacity. Be boldness. Non-violence is boldness. Otherwise, is maintaining the status quo, complete silence. So that's an important thing. Another thing is, of course, you know, it's active. As Gandhi says, one very important sentence, we have the initiative. Having the initiative in nonviolence is one of the main keys for having a little advance against dishumanity, because we always are one step back of the adversary. He acts first and we react. So it's very important to have a strategic view of the conflict, the struggle. That means being one step before the adversary. Okay. Another thing I want to say is this. There is a weapon in nonviolence that is very important, that is named the moral reserve. Every society has a moral reserve. But many times in border humanity times, that moral reserve doesn't act in the street and in a direct way for stopping violence. So it's very important that this moral reserve that can be massive, for example, church, artists, intellectuals, parts of the society, or bodies, persons that have a big social power. Pope has a big social power. Not only for God, I don't know, but in the society he has a big social power. that it's more than the one of us together. So the power, the adversary, the governments see him different as they see us. That's a very important thing in nonviolence. If many bodies with this kind of social power wouldn't say in history enough with inhumanity, we would be still in the Stone Age. So humanity has advanced in his long process of humanization because persons or masses have said enough is enough to this humanity, no? And put their bodies where there is the key of the violence. Okay. Well, knowledge doesn't work quickly. That's my problem. I don't want to run it. But it's like this. Two things important. Genocide is the most unhuman action of human species. That's very important to understand. There is no more unhuman action than genocide. So we are in front. Of course, you can say, yes, there is a genocide in Darfur, there is a genocide in Central Africa Republic, in Congo, there are others. But here in Gaza, we are seeing it 24 hours in the day, and it has a level of barbarism and violence and impunity where it's difficult to find otherwhere. Okay, so that's a very important thing, that we cannot be lukewarm with genocide, as Apocalypse says. Yes? Okay. As church, second thing, genocide is the action of many over few, not as the books of history tell us that is the action of a few mad persons, Netanyahu, Biden, and 10 more Sadiq persons that are killing 2 million of Palestine. That's completely untrue. It's millions and millions of citizens of Israel that don't say nothing, of United States, of Mexico, of all parts of the world, that support that some authorities do what they do. The same happened with Nazis. The same happened in all other countries of incredible genocides, ex-Yugoslavia, Cambodia, well, all what you can imagine of that. So it's very important, this situation, because it's the action of many over few. And in those many, we are there if we don't say nothing or we don't do nothing. Yes? And if we are part of the moral reserve and we have more social power, we must do more. Okay. So the problem of those people, and I only leave the idea, is blind obedience to authority. That's the problem of humanity, not civil disobedience, as Howard Zinn says, a North American historian. The problem is civil obedience, not civil disobedience. Okay, so incredible, important things in life always take the last part. We know that in all, but I came here to ask this situation. It's my question. Why Pope Francis is not in Gaza? That's the question I have. Not only him, he with a leader of Jewish religion and Islam religion and also other traditions, they should be with their bodies inside Gaza with Palestine families and also with the families of the hostages of Israel, building some kind of putting the body inside in some kind of peace action. You could say, oh, they are going to be killed, bombed. No, I think big powers, Israel government, Biden, won't throw bombs if they are there. And it would open a space of another kind of awareness and dialogue. And also for humanity border, it will say, well, what we are being silent of. That's it. Of course, you can say Israeli government wouldn't let the Pope go inside with perhaps United Nations Secretary, because excuses for not doing nothing is fool the world. For me, it came a good idea, an idea of gospel. And this is a sense of humor, but it's real for me, please. And I'm not crazy, but not utopian. It's real. When Jesus was giving health to people, there was a man that was very ill, and he could never touch Jesus. And his family made a hole in the roof and put him there. And I think that's what we have to do with Pope in Gaza. With the Secretary of United Nations, there are many ways. And I don't accept the argument that he is old or ill, because he has just been in the most long trip of his Pope to Southeast Asia. So I want only to share, but in a sense of thinking out loud, not saying what to do, not saying nobody's, but I respect totally the Pope, and I think, and I say this because I know he's a man of God and of nonviolence, he understands. But it's a moment, because genocide demands that we as church and as hierarchy must put the body inside, where are the most bounded and hurted people in the world, with a plus, it's Holy Land. A little plus. Okay, yeah.
Let's have a round of applause. Thank you so much, Pietro. So we are going to, in a moment, I'm going to invite us to reflect with our esteemed panel. We have heard from Leo how nonviolent evangelization is the only way for the church to recover its identity, given its implicit and explicit part of the colonization project, to challenge the logic of violence. We heard a very creative paper from Anna Blackman, who helped us think about the 4 marks of the church as aspects of nonviolence as a way of life, as a spirituality, and as a method of change. The one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church is a nonviolent church. And Pietro, what can we say? Pietro Ameglio brought his process to us, to, in this place, at the Vatican, to call us to what do we do? What does the Pope do? What do we do? You know, Pope Francis in 2019, in front of theologians, said, I think of nonviolence as a perspective and a way of understanding the world. I think we have had 3 ways of understanding the world that each of you has brought. I just want to say, I was in Palestine in August, and I felt that the time I was there, I had the largest, most powerful nonviolence training I've ever had in my life, as we crisscrossed the country into zones of risk. And the training was being led by Christians who take Jesus seriously. So I appreciate your bringing this. We are now going to open this, and maybe, Marie, you could move this around. Please, just raise your hand if you have a comment or a question for our esteemed people of wisdom. What's coming up for us?
I thank you, Pietro, especially Pietro, because it touches me very closely. I am originally from Lebanon. And I wonder sometimes in my reflections, why doesn't the Pope go to Lebanon? Not only now, like since it went into crisis, deep crisis 4 or 5 years ago. But also when the war in Ukraine, before it started, and when we started to hear about the Russian preparation, I also shared with my friends, why doesn't the Pope go to Russia? I mean, it's very natural in me. It touched me very, very deep when you said, when you have shared your reflection, because so many people can have the same reflection, the same ideas in during their meditations, during their prayers. But we feel sometimes helpless when we think about what can a big social power that you call it, when we think if they are not acting, what can we do? So that's all. It's not a question, it's a comment.
So a comment. When we look at the history of the Catholic Church, we see Church as both violent at times as well as non-violent. When Church was violent, there were people, as many of you shared, people who stood up as a prophet who challenged the Church to be non-violent. In today's world, I think we need more prophets who would challenge the Church to remain non-violent. And I hope and pray that Catholic Institute for Nonviolence would be one of the ways that where we can witness and challenge, be a prophet as well as challenging the Church to be nonviolent all the time. Another reflection, as when you were sharing, why don't the Pope go into Gaza and remain there? I had another reflection. If by chance, if we invite Putin and Netanyahu to be part of this conference here, and if we talk to them about non-violence, how would we be able to convince them when they say that, no, violence is the only way to get rid of the terrorist activities? And how we as members of this forum would be able to convince both of them that no, there is a non-violent way of addressing this issue. What would be our response?
Better all speak now. Questions together.
I have a question to you regarding this. You beautifully presented the theological dimension of nonviolence rooted in the life and sacrifice of Christ and the Trinitarian dimension. But when you look at the two conflicts that's happening today, the Jews, who in a way reflect on their word of God and say, we have a God who is there with us to fight. And a theology of violence. And on the other side, Hezbollah means party of God, where they also have a very deep theological foundation to fight. So how do we dialogue with these two? Of course, we have absolutely, I understand our notion of God and theology. How do we dialogue with these two very foundational aspects that we see in front of us?
First of all, thank you very much for the richness of your interventions. This last intervention brought me back to my experience on the post-election violence in Kenya. How theology is prophetic action, but we must be there together with the people. And in fact, We did not try to convince anybody, but we went in the camp, where the two basic tribes who were fighting for 3 days and 3 nights in Kibera Slum, and we were there with them. We did not teach about be calm on how to deal with conflicts, but we were there surely praying because, yes, it was scary, but what was bringing us to act, we were part, the first ones, we went there as the religious union, male and female together. Really action, the action of interventions without making any difference between the two tribes. Intervention that were speaking about love, even if they were, in a way, it was very risky. But we were not feeling the fear, we were feeling only the being with the people. And that, I think, that was the possibility of having 3,000, they were 3,500 people, that they, at the end, they were together in the same camp, but they were not fighting anymore.
We'll take one more and then see if there are reflections from our panel.
Leo, you talked about how children are what keeps us from devolving into more violence. I think that really, provoked my imagination, right, for how that might be. But it sounds like that comes from like a personal experience maybe, and I wonder if you could help us make that more concrete so that we might know how to look for it better.
I wonder if we could start with that question, if you're open to that.
Great, thank you. Maybe I'll try to tie my responding a bit to the questions presented. And Sister, I just want to echo what you said, and maybe make some comments about that and come back to the last question there. You said we were not, I don't know if you said you were not afraid or something along those lines, but the thought that came to mind is one of the most difficult things that has to be overcome in the work of nonviolence is the fear of death. As long as we are afraid of dying ourselves, then we will always be compromising on some level. I'm not saying that anyone gets over it, but this is what Jesus did at the Garden of Gethsemane before his own crucifixion. Until you confront your own mortality and the violence that resides within each one of us, then we will always be beholden to carrying out and giving life to that violence. It is only when we are freed from the fear of death, and this is, I think, the most difficult element in the following of Jesus, that for most of us, we die afraid of death rather than confronting that. And I think that is almost that linchpin, the crux moment when we take on the mind of Christ, I'm going to say, and have the freedom, the radical freedom to enter places of conflict where we do not actually know what we're going to do. And certainly, as you said, we're not there to convince anyone of anything. And I think Gandhi would say, one of the most difficult things for us in the West writ large, is the division of means and ends thinking. We have an objective. I'm going to convert you. I'm going to tell you what a right theology may be, what the right God may be, or how to end this war. We have an objective, and then we say, how do I get to that objective? Gandhi's way of thinking was exactly the opposite. We have no objective. We have a means that we live and incarnate right now, and means are ends in the making. And the moment you separate the two, the present from the future that I want, you know that you're going to fit violence in there to get that future. Only when we become a means-driven body of Christ in history, with an open end, it is for God to dictate that end, not for us. Only then do we, I think, have the capacity to follow this uncertain spirit that moves us and to overcome the fear of death. But that is a profound difference in our epistemologies, in our ways of thinking, means ends thinking. this dualistic approach. And that's spiritual work. That's deep spiritual work that has to be done. So I just wonder, just your thoughts, kind of, in one sense, responding also to this question about, I don't think I can convince, if your God is this and our interpretations are radically different, but there's a way of witnessing within that puts my life at risk. And I said, that's part of it. I do not get to live in the midst of violence with a nonviolent commitment and not be open to the possibility that my life is offered in freedom as a witness to something more that is not violence. The childhood imagination, I don't know, your question kind of asks me to speak about perhaps, maybe one way I can respond to this. As a child, I remember in my village in Chalatenango, there would be naked dead bodies in the corner that would be placed there by the military or could be by the guerrillas as a way of terrorizing people. You're not supposed to touch it. You're not supposed to acknowledge there's even a naked body there. It's just there, and it's a symbolic way of torturing minds and of depowering you, of taking away your agency. You do not become a subject that has any capacity to resist in one sense. You gotta take sides in one sense. That's the normal way of thinking about this. In the midst of that, then every morning you would hear Romero's homilies that would be played on the radio. And to this day, every morning, the Catholic radio station plays a homily of Romero for that day. I mean, this is faith formation in the midst of war, still happening decades later. People are being formed with Romero's way of thinking. And Romero had, in a way, he wouldn't use the words nonviolent. As I said, still in Latin America, I think Gandhian nonviolence is still very much under thought and or underestimated, as is kind of gospel nonviolence as well. But Romero got it. He may not have used the word nonviolence, but he got it. He was all about this way of being. And so my way of answering your question is, in the midst of war, an option is put before you as a child, but then you're just a child at the same time. You play, you climb trees, you go in the rivers. And the capacity to make play, and that's really what I was trying to communicate, even in Gaza, right? When I watch videos and I see kids still like throwing rocks or something, the capacity to play is a safeguard against the violence. So part of it, I started with that, but the rest got so theological. I want to say there's something about Jesus's "let the children come to me" that it still holds true, and about our capacity to become, as Gustavo Gutierrez would say, a spiritual childhood, those who open themselves to receive the Spirit of God radically, which is a process of also taking our egos away, that still speaks to us. What does it mean to become a child again in the midst of war? To play. I climbed trees. I went into the rivers while war was around me. It's what you do to survive, and I guess from sinking deeper into that war. Yeah.
So we have a few minutes, and if you have some reflections, then we'll bring it.
Thank you everyone for all your questions and comments. I think I was just reflecting on these questions about how do we speak to others who don't necessarily take the non-violent position or see violence as the only answer. I think in both of the conflicts that people raised in Russia and Ukraine and in the Holy Land, part of what we can see is these are based on very long historical cycles of violence, and violence has not worked, essentially. It hasn't been effective, it has just perpetuated. So I think it's about interrupting that. But I think, in both, fear of the other is very powerful. So I think encounter is important, the humanizing of the other. But I also think, importantly, in non-violence, it's about building up a better option as well. It's building up something more attractive. And I think we talk about the joy of the gospel, joy, love. This is contagious. If people see a better alternative, I think that's what we need to build, to draw people in. Rather, not sort of condemning, but drawing them in invitation into that joy.
three, four very short things, very thanks of all what says. Our sister of Kenya said, only being with people. I think that's a key idea of what I wanted to say. I will explain better because the quick didn't let me do that. That's the Holy Spirit action now in the middle of a genocide, I think. Being with people. As Jesus says in the last judgment, I was thirsty, you gave me water. I was ill, I was in jail, I was alone. No? That's, and Jesus, Donald taught us this. Is the only moment in the gospel he is son of the man. So his idea was that Jesus will appear to us as the men that were around us in life. And we'll ask you, what did you do when I was like this? What did you do when I was like this? So the idea of being with people in the middle of that level of inhumanity is the key. The second idea is this. I think the shield of nonviolence and of Christian spirituality for an action in the middle of genocide is pray and fast. If you want 3 days, if you want to be biblical, 40 days. But let's think humble, go 3 days. Not alone, with leaders from Jewish and Muslim and other traditions, and with lay people. This is very important for me, because, and we are not saying, go you. We are going with, in the sense they want to go with. Yes, it's not saying the Pope or the hierarchy must do. We are saying that we are going with. Okay, because that's a kind of moral reflection. The third thing quickly is this. The name of stopping genocide now from direct Palestine people with whom we work, university students, is ceasefire. That's the name of peace. We are not speaking of 2 states or 1 state. No, that's noise. The real is ceasefire, humanitarian aid, liberation of hostages. That's, and nonviolence speak to both parts. Palestinians under the bombs and Israelis with relatives with hostages. That's the key of nonviolent action in both sides. And another thing is, of course, Ukraine is not the same of Gaza. I don't say, or perhaps Lebanon, of course. In Ukraine, there is not a genocide. And it's a good subject to discuss, but this is not the moment. In Gaza, there is a genocide, the most unhuman action of human species. That's why we must put the bodies there in the first moment. Of course, who wants to do things in Ukraine, in other parts, Mexico, we are full of violence, but it's not the same situation. And I go to the last point very quickly, 1 minute. We don't want for that the Pope to travel in every genocide in the world or putting him as his body everywhere. We are speaking there because we think that in Gaza, as women and Israeli and Palestine say, is the key to peace and non-violence throughout the world. Because in Gaza there is been an advanced experiment of capitalism, of display, exterminate, appropriate of all natural resources, all strategic, geostrategic resources, with the silence of the world and with all the international law without any power. So we must try to use other kinds of power. Church has some kind of power, but in 1 year it didn't do nothing real against genocide. Surely it does humanitarian aid, but we are speaking in a level of non-violence in a genocide. There are many levels. I'm sure church does a lot of humanitarian action, but that doesn't stop the hand of genocide. I'm speaking of stopping the hand of genocide. I'm speaking of another level. But, okay, till that.
Let's take a moment and allow what's happened in this holy space to really go into us as we reflect on what is the church's role for the nonviolent shift in the church and around the world. We're very grateful for our presenters. We encourage you to follow the Catholic Institute for Nonviolence, Pax Christi International, and the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative. Let's have a final round of applause for everything that was presented.